Hello and welcome to day 2, stage number 3 of the Tour de Oz. I'm Matthew Keenan joining you. Yesterday we saw 2 stages. There was the individual time trial followed by the criterium, and it was a brilliant day of racing. This is the last opportunity for somebody else to assume the overall race lead. I'm joined by 2007 points race world champion Kate Bates. Kate, welcome to the show.
Well, good morning, Matt. And wasn't yesterday a pretty action-packed way to start a 3-stage tour here for the Tour of Oz? Of course, we started with the individual time trial, only 6.3 kilometres, but some time gaps opened up already. Then they only had about 15 minutes break, which just makes my legs and lungs hurt just sitting here before they headed into a pretty fast and furious criterium. That was about 34 kilometres. And in that we saw, Matt, that there were a few attacks off the front, but more than that, there are a lot of riders getting dropped off the back, I think, as that time trial started to bite.
Yeah, it was super aggressive, wasn't it, the criterium? And we went into that thinking these are gaps from the individual time trial that are defendable. And we saw that was not necessarily the case. We saw a bit of a shift in the general classification. So today's stage, it is everything bagel. Let's take a look at the course. And for anybody who's ridden at least a few times on Zwift, Kate, I'm sure this is a course that they've ridden. And for me, the climbs early in this course, particularly that first one, as it looks like you're going up a glass road, it feels like I can't get any traction because I'm going so slowly and it's really steep.
Well, the everything bagel, I mean, it really is that. There's not just cream cheese on this bad boy. There's everything included. It's one of the toughest courses out on Zwift. They do start the KOM after about 2 kilometres, so they need to be on the start line pretty warmed up and ready to go. It hits up to 14.1%, so incredibly steep. And there's a few false flats, especially on the KOM reverse, where they think maybe they're near the top and then they'll just hit the start of the segment, which is still 1.1 kilometres to go. So certainly a very challenging course. If the riders haven't warmed up, I'm sorry to tell, especially the ladies who start very soon, it's probably too late. But for the fellas, you need a really good warm-up, because the action is absolutely sure to start within that first few K.
Well, we're just 2 minutes away before the women get started, 32 minutes away before the men get underway. Let's head down to the pens and see the women as they do start to warm up. And you mentioned, Kate, that climb coming really early. One of the things that is really notable about Zwift racing, even without a climb at the start, is the need to get into the pen early and have your physical engine going as the clock does start to count down. It's 5.5 minutes before they do make a start, a little bit longer than I anticipated, but it is one of those moments where you know when the gun goes, it will be on.
Well, we discussed yesterday some of the kind of technical elements involved with getting into a Zwift race. You not only need to make sure that your connection is really strong, that your cables are all plugged in, that there aren't any toddlers rumbling around the house that may trip over them and unplug you, because that spells disaster. But you also need to get to the pens nice and early to make sure that when that countdown clock hits 0, that you're ready to go. Often they go out of the pens fairly quickly. It's not surprising to see people kind of really launch out of there and some gaps open up fairly quickly. I mean, I guess the one difference is if you're standing physically on the start line with someone, everybody's kind of eyeing each other up and seeing, kind of trying to play a few mind games. You can't really do that in the Zwift world. So I think that that's good, because I think it insulates people a little bit, and it gives them the ability to really focus on their own race. I mean, we heard yesterday, Matt, from Ryan Thomas, who said in the Zwift world, you do have to kind of run your own race a bit more, because you don't have that same external feedback. In a way, it kind of purifies it, I think.
Yeah, and you've always heard the classic cliche from coaches: if you're hurting, your rivals will be hurting as well. So that's the one thing every rider needs to remind themselves when they are really struggling. They think, I might be about to be dropped. You can't see the body language of everybody else. But if you're in the red zone, there's a fair chance that everybody else is in the red zone as well.
Yeah, spot on. You never attack when you're comfortable, because if you're super comfortable, you can bet your bottom dollar that some of the other riders will be as well, and you kind of end up wasting energy. On a course like this, I think there's a few interesting elements aside from just the climbs, and there are two, and they do kind of bookend the race, and we'll see everybody zooming around Central Park in the middle. But we need to remember that they get power-ups through the KOMs and through 2 sprints. Now, they won't count to overall classification at all. There aren't any bonuses out on course. But those power-ups, especially the feather, going up that second KOM in particular, that could really have a very positive effect on any of the riders. So I think we'll see a few games there with people dropping power-ups to try and get new ones. And we need to consider how that will play out as well.
Yeah, I'm anticipating, particularly on that second climb, in both the women and the men, that we'll see plenty of aggression and riders that don't fancy themselves as sprinters trying to go away and trying to create a gap. And one woman I'm looking forward to seeing, no pressure, she works for Zwift, she's a former Australian representative, Carly Taylor. Kate Bates, I've got huge expectations for Carly Taylor today.
Well, so do I. And I think a big advantage that Carly has, aside from the fact that she's an incredible athlete, is the fact that she knows the Zwift world really well. So I was taking a look at the different bike selections you could use for a course like this, because when you go into game, you can choose your equipment. So that's a bit of a twist on what happens in the professional world, where they're given a bike and equipment and have to use it. You actually get to choose it. And knowing which bike to choose can make all the difference. So on this course, for example, the Specialized Venge is almost a minute faster than any other standard bike on this course. A minute faster. That's just incredible, the difference it makes. Someone like Carly
I've got a question
knows
out of
the game
self-interest.
so
Hang
well.
on. I've got a question out of self-interest then. If I'm on this course, should I be using the Venge or the Tron?
Well, I think the Tron is probably the best all-around bike, but we have to consider that not every rider will have access to the Tron. So that comes into play as well, because you do need to have ridden 50,000 vertical meters to get that. And again, if you're a heavier rider and are probably more concerned about what's happening going up the climbs rather than the overall, something like the Specialized Tarmac Pro with the lightweight wheels, that will give you the advantage going up the climbs. It's not as good coming down, but if you carry that body weight anyway, it tends to even out a bit. So it is quite individual for the person. But you're right, Matt. In general, if you have the Tron, it's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, it is my one of choice. I do have those kilometers up, and it's only fairly recently, and I'm pretty happy to use that on any event, except maybe the individual time trial. We saw yesterday everybody made that choice of riding the individual time trial bikes. It was fascinating, Kate, yesterday watching the individual time trials, in that they all started together, but there was no drafting effect. So you could have that psychological benefit of being able to see your rivals, but if you don't have the power, you don't have the power.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it can actually really throw your pacing off. You can get a rider in sight and try and hang on to them. And ultimately, if they're going that little bit higher than what your threshold is, in the back half, you'll really start to pay for that. And, I think 6.3 kilometres, you might think it's not very far, but in fact, that can do a whole lot of damage to the legs. The women's C is underway here. That's what we're looking at now, Matt. Looks actually like a fairly civilised start out of the gates.
It does look reasonably civilised, for now at least. They're anticipating that first climb, which is to come. And one of the elements that we're seeing across all the categories is groups of women that support other women with their riding. And you're involved heavily in one of those groups, but there's also any of the women that have got CMA after their name, in brackets, representing the team that they're riding for, Cycling Mums Australia. So looking forward to seeing how some of them go. And we've got a few of those riding in the D grade event as well, which is about to get started. So it's great to see groups of women coming together and encouraging other women to ride.
Oh, that's exactly right. And Cycling Mums Australia is a great group. It was founded in 2016 by Natalia de Klerk, who's up in Brisbane. It's beautiful bike riding weather up in Brisbane, so probably a good location to start it. And the idea was that when she had kids, when she got back into riding, she didn't really know where she belonged, and she didn't know how to get back into the recreational and participation side of the sport. She didn't want to go and ride in these big, intimidating bunches with the fellas. And so she started Cycling Mums Australia, and now they're quite a big community. And it's great to have seen them jump into Zwift in the last year. They have some bunch rides throughout the week, and they've also kind of started to dip their toe into racing. I think it's just a really inclusive community, and we are seeing, particularly in these C and D categories, really deep fields. A lot of numbers, a lot of women just giving it a go. It's something that we don't necessarily see in real life at club level, and so it's pretty pleasing to see all these ladies giving it a go.
I totally agree. Wazinski is just making a little bit of a move off the front. She's opened up the slightest of gaps. You're heavily involved in a group as well, Kate, that is encouraging women to get out on bikes and ride. One of the things that I do like about Zwift is it takes away the risk element, and it creates for a much safer environment, and you can do it in your own home, whether it be the living room, the home office, out in the garage. You don't have to worry about what you're wearing, how you look for others. There's not the uncomfortable moment at the coffee shop, and it's safe. So it really is a good entry point for cycling.
Yeah, it really is. So chicks who ride bikes, we have over 10,000 females just in Australia, predominantly on the East Coast, who get involved with that. And the feedback from them, especially around the virtual cycling, has been just how low the anxiety level is when trying to participate or get involved. A lot of these women, they're multitaskers, they're quite time poor, and they don't even necessarily have the opportunity to get out on the road and make it worth it. And they find that this is a really safe environment. They don't have to worry so much about the skills. And it also lets the ladies get quite fit before they do go out on the road and then have to worry about developing their skills. And so it's a bit of a chicken and an egg when you're first starting in cycling. Do I just buy a bike and head out there and give it a go? What if I don't like it? I feel like this is quite a midway entry point. What's actually quite cool is we saw a whole heap of Australian women participate in the APAC League for the WTRL Zwift Racing League in season 1. There were a huge cohort of Aussie ladies. And then when they had the Masters National Championships, a lot of them met up in person for the first time. So they were racing in virtual teams together, and they were, competitors out on course, but they actually hadn't met the other riders at all. And that was really cool. I started seeing photos pop up on social media like, oh my gosh, they're a real person. You get so used to what somebody's avatar looks like. And so I think it's a really good way to connect that as well. And dare I say, over the summer, I'm sure that there've been a few meetups of friendships and communities that have been made in the virtual world.
I do like that. We're on board with CGAR at the moment. You can see the CMA, Cycling Mums Australia, and then a hashtag, Yeah the Girls. And I'm sure that there would have been a lot of people that you spoke about there that hadn't really met each other in real life. They've been riding together for a while, and then it all just comes together. And it's probably a little bit like when you listen to somebody on the radio for a number of years and you've never seen them, and then you see them on the news or on the television, or you see them in person at an event, and it comes together, and you think, I actually didn't associate that voice with that body or that person, but now you put it all together and yeah, that works.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've really loved, we've got 2 weekly Chicks Who Ride Bikes rides on Zwift, and it's a pretty big and boisterous community as well. And I love seeing some of the names pop up in the racing commentary as well, because I feel like I know them, and I might walk directly past them in the street, but I recognise their avatar, which is quite cool. The winner yesterday in the C category, who's coming into today with the lead, Matt, is Beth Stoner. She's a pretty powerful bike rider. She averaged 4.3 watts per kilo through the time trial. So very impressive.
That's impressive.
And I think that she will go pretty well up the climbs today. If the climbs aren't raced particularly hard, we might see a few small groups forming to get to the top. But if anybody, Beth's in a good position to do this, really takes the responsibility and puts in some heavy attacks, I feel like we may see some very big gaps opening up. Now, we also have to consider that there's about 24 kilometres worth of flat. I say flat, but slightly lumpy, definitely nothing like these climbs in between when they're going around Central Park. That's a pretty big opportunity for groups to come back together. But if so much damage gets done that they're in 1s and 2s, then it becomes a lot harder to reform.
And that's exactly what is happening now, Kate. The damage is being done. We're seeing some gaps really start to open up on this first of the climbs. We're still on board with Seeger, who's sitting in around 11th position. She's doing well to be able to try and hold on towards the front of this group. And you mentioned before about watts per kilo. She's riding at 3.5 watts per kilo. So they're pretty good numbers. The challenge is not to panic, seeing that little gap that is opening up in front of the rider who's in front of her. And that is Watts Sisters from Canada. I quite like that name as well. But the gaps, they open up so quickly on a climb like this one, Kate.
I do love the team names. I think people can get quite creative. We've got a huge cohort from AHDRL, the Aussie Hump Day Riders ladies squad there, and they've got a sub-team called We Ate the Cake, which I think is pretty good. We all want to eat the cake, don't we? Have it and eat it too. I can see Carla Joy from Cycling Mums Australia. She's sitting pretty comfortably in there. But on that rider screen, that's a really good way for people watching along at home to understand in real time what the riders, the powers they're putting out, so those numbers directly under their names, the watts per kilo. On the flat, watts per kilo may not be as important, but certainly up a climb that will make a very big difference. So the higher numbers, we know they're working harder.
And the challenge is not to have to do too many accelerations to try and close down some gaps and ride smartly. What has been fascinating for me early on when I started commentating on Zwift races and then doing a few of the mass participation events, like the Tour de Zwift that is happening at the moment, there's a lot of riders who might produce more watts per kilo averaged across the race who don't finish inside the top 5. You've got to use your power at the right time. So there is a lot that goes into this racing tactically. It's not just horsepower.
No, and we can see that we'll constantly see some similar acronyms on the right. We can see a couple of CMA riders at the moment. We've talked about AHDR and the Watts sisters. Of course, Revo is another team that's out there, and ATP is a very familiar name in these community leagues as well. A lot of them will be quite organised to ride as a team. Often you'll then have a team leader. They communicate via Discord is the usual platform for communication. Often they'll have themselves on videos and they'll be able to chat and kind of rejig any strategy that may be happening. It's not too dissimilar. I mean, it's a virtual team car essentially, but you will have somebody who's taking responsibility for that. We can see some big gaps opening up, but small groups within it. So we've got Anderson and Vasseur at the front here. Visser and Megs are in hot pursuit. They're starting to break up a bit, but this group of 4 could form and be a bit of a danger, because then it's a decent gap of 9 seconds back to that next chasing bunch. 9 seconds in any capacity is quite a bit, but in the Zwift world, that can sometimes may as well be a minute, because once you lose sight of the riders in front of you, it becomes very, very difficult to chase.
Yeah, even 3 seconds. 3 seconds out in the real world, you can almost, once you get over the top of the climb, drift back into their slipstream. But 3 seconds on this platform is really, really tough. We're on board with Keela at the moment. She's sitting in 3rd position and she's lost a little bit of distance to the leaders. This is going across to the next category and she's got some work to do. 10-second gap. That's the sort of distance that you spoke about just a moment ago, Kate. 10 seconds, it doesn't sound like much, but on a course like this, it can be all the difference and can blow it quickly to 1 minute.
Well, I tend to think in the Zwift world, whenever I see the number 15 seconds, a breakaway tends to be able to stick long term when it goes over that 15-second threshold. So that 10 seconds is real danger time. And it's kind of the point of the race, even though we're so early into it, where they have to commit to bridge across, or it might be too late. There's about 24k until the next climb. It's the same climb, but in reverse. So they will literally feel like they're doing laps around New York, because in a way they are, with the bagel kind of shape doing that. But in between those 24k, it is a chance to really work together if you do have a big group that is chasing. What I'm seeing though so far is that there aren't really any big groups. There's a lot of 1 seconds between the riders. Even 1 second is a big enough gap that you're not in the draft. And so they're all kind of individual time trialing after each other. That is not going to be an effective chasing strategy at all. Keela, who we're watching at the moment, she's stuck in no man's land there. That is also going to be a pretty long day in the saddle for her.
She does have a group of riders, about 5 riders that are at 5 seconds behind. You can just see them off in the distance. I'm of the view, Kate, that for Keela, she's probably best served to wait for this group that we're now back on board with, and they're at 5 seconds behind her. Stoner is the rider that we're following at the moment from the United States. Williams is in there from the Revo team that you mentioned just a couple of moments ago. This is a good working group, and this is exactly what you spoke about earlier as well, Kate. That gap to Koira and Toshi, the 2 Japanese riders out in front at 22 seconds. This group might be big enough to reel them back in if they work super well together.
Well, and so I actually believe with the C cat mat that they're racing a slightly shorter distance, so they won't actually go over that second KOM. All of a sudden, the urgency has just grown. I gave them a bit of a get out of jail card there with the 24 kilometres in between. They don't actually have that, so they do need to work pretty hard in this middle section, because that's where it all changes. So the profile for the C-Cat is slightly different there. We can see the KOM kind of falls on that midpoint. With gaps like this group of 6 is probably in the best position. Beth Stoner, she was the standout yesterday, won the time trial and was 3rd in the criterium. She's certainly the rider to watch. It wouldn't surprise me if her break mates there were kind of looking at her to take a bit more responsibility. She is the incumbent jersey holder, so all eyes on her.
and they're racing 20.5 kilometers, so that's a really intense distance. It's kind of like athletics terms, perhaps the 1500 meters or so. It's not quite a marathon event, it's not a sprint type distance, but it is short enough to be super fast, long enough to be testing your endurance. This group though, Kate, they are working pretty well together. They've clawed back 2 seconds. They're just 20 seconds off the leaders at the halfway point.
Well, 20, if they can get it under 15, then I think they're on track. But they do need to keep working well together. In a way, I think sometimes it's easier to get a coherent chase going with a small bunch in the Zwift world, because if you all just use the draft effect very well, you can just slide over the front without having to accelerate too much and not get your head too stuck in the wind. So they do need to roll over the turns here, and by that I mean that when they're on the front, they should only stay there for about 20 seconds. They've just hit that KOM, so they've got about 1.1 kilometers up here, and already look how steep it is. It literally looks like some of the riders are coming to a near standstill. I mean, this is pretty brutal. It does flatten out a tiny little bit here, and almost enough, I think. It's kind of cruel, actually. Almost enough that your legs and lungs go, oh, thank goodness. And then it kicks up again, and you have to re-engage the chase. I mean, it's pretty unforgiving.
It is incredibly unforgiving, and you can see Stoner here, which has that little gap. She's working her way back into the slipstream, and everybody's experienced this, Kate, and I'm not sure whether it is encouragement or it is torment when it pops up on the screen, 2 meters, 3 meters, close the gap. I'm sure it was designed for encouragement.
It's torment. I think it pops up, and when you're getting dropped, to kind of give you a bit of a impetus to push, a bit of encouragement. Come on, you're nearly there. But normally when I drop the wheel, I mean, there's only a couple of reasons you drop the wheel. One is because a child comes in and asks to, use the iPad or something like that, in which case you can normally kind of power on a bit, or you're dropping the wheel because you've run out of juice, in which case that message pops up and you want to yell back at it, I'm trying. It's like when in the good old days, you'd get the coach in your earpiece telling you, come on, chase, chase, chase. And you're thinking, do you think I'm riding on my own at 190 heart rate just for the fun of it? I am trying. But yes, it can be ever so slightly offensive.
Yeah, for sure. Well, our two leaders, the two Japanese riders, being led at the moment by Toshi, now out to 40 seconds. It looked for a little while as if that gap was going to slowly get clawed back in. It's going in the opposite direction. Those two are working really well together out in front. And we can see this group, Kate, still on this steep little pinch. They're not able to really take advantage of their numerical superiority to the two out in front. And there's no slipstreaming at this point. It is survival, claw your way over the top. And I'm of the view, Kate, that this group now, they're not racing for the win. They're racing to beat the others that they're with.
Well, Corey and
Go
Toshi are not actually together. So they're actually about 10 seconds apart from each other. So even they are having a bit of a race off at the front. The bunch now is breaking up. I mean, Beth Stoner, we know that she's one to watch. Michelle Keeler has been fairly consistent in kind of following her around a little bit. Actually, at the very top of this race, Matt, I said, Beth Stoner, you kind of could almost afford to follow her around a little bit because she is the incumbent. But these Japanese riders have kind of taken advantage of that and they've taken off. And I don't know that they'll be able to catch it. What did we say? When it was 20 seconds, if they can bring it to 15, I'm confident. Well, it's blown out to 43, 54 seconds now. So I think you're right. I think they may be racing for the podium here.
But are you confident now, on a different note, confident that Toshi is going to stay out in front, the two Japanese riders that now, as you mentioned, they've split and Toshi has a 13-second advantage on Corey. So those two, they're at almost the halfway mark. They've covered just about 10 kilometres in a race that is 20.5k. So they're getting past the hardest part of the course. It's about to head downhill. They'll have plenty of morale in whether it's their living room or their garage, wherever they're riding, they'll certainly be riding with some confidence.
Well, hopefully they've got a little cheer squad and support crew at home as well, who are giving them some encouraging words. I do think Toshi in particular looks very, very strong. She's pulling away from Kaori. She's obviously a very good climber because that KOM has just absolutely blown the bunch to smithereens. It's interesting to note that the bunch was already in pieces when they hadn't even hit the KOM. They'd hit a few lumps earlier on, but they hadn't hit that really decisive climb. So I think at this point, it's becoming a race for third and to see what happens. Vasseur here, she's also stuck kind of in no man's land, but she's powering on and she's keeping that persistent, pretty high watts per kg to kind of see if she can push forward. Oh, she's got a mate here now, another Japanese rider. It's always good, actually, when you feel like you're out there on your own, to have another rider around you and think, okay, might get a bit of a break here, a bit of a draft, or at the very least something to chase. She has blown kind of right past Vasseur here, but I do think once they go over the top, these pair might rejoin and put themselves in a good chance to chase those groups ahead.
Well, it's been a strong move by of Japan, and they're almost at the halfway mark. They've covered 9.5 kilometres. Vasseur has been the one really applying the pressure. She's in second position in the D grade event. She's now at 5 seconds behind Visser is just behind her at 16 seconds. And then there again, Kate, there's no group per se. We've got a couple, Anderson and Nahoa, at 33 seconds, but other than that, everybody is fighting on their own, and that highlights just how tough this course is. We started with an individual time trial yesterday. This is turning into an individual time trial once again.
Well, and these are some new names from yesterday as well, so that's pretty exciting to see the depth in field, that we've got a whole new group of riders coming to the fore today versus yesterday. Christine Vasseur is riding. She's got pretty good rhythm. We can see her watts on the right of screen. She's fairly consistent. And when she does get out of her seat, she doesn't accelerate in an unreasonable manner. It's just pretty much to keep the pace. That's quite a good and dynamic way to climb, that you get out of your seat when you are starting to drop pace, and it's simply to push up and hold the pace. And we can see she's climbed back past there. I think these two riders need to look after each other over the top here to maintain that gap. They've got 35 seconds over that chasing group behind. Again, I think it's going to be pretty hard with 35 seconds for them to claw that back.
Well, so far from what we've seen, Vasseur has been a lot more consistent, and she's been gas on, recuperate, gas off for a moment, and then gas on once again. She's got the spits and spurts, but it is Vasseur who's just consistently going about her thing. She can feel that the gradient just eases off ever so slightly at this point. And this is the part of the course, Kate, that I was talking about earlier on, that when I'm in my garage and I'm on this course, this road, it feels like wet glass with no grip, and I'm not getting any traction. I'm not going anywhere.
Well, we did see, didn't we, in the C's, when they first kicked up to that steep part of the KOM where it's around 14%, that the avatars, a couple of them, almost looked like they were coming to a grinding halt. I think that it can be quite tough, and it depends also what trainer settings you have on. The first time I ever had my trainer set to realistic, and I went over cobbles, and the trainer started vibrating quite violently. I thought something was very wrong with the bike. And with the trainer, I turned that off. I've got to say that's not really my preference, but it does depend. That's a really personal thing. Some riders really feel like that part of the trainer setting is important to get a more realistic race. But I don't think when they're riding over the glass, I don't think there'd be too much tyre spinning happening. You'll have to give that a go for me and report back.
I will. I'll do that. What I do like when you're riding across the cobblestones is just the noise. I like the noise changes within Zwift to give the sense of that atmosphere. And I've got the biggest TV I can get into the garage to try and immerse myself as much as possible. If I'm just doing a training session, I'll often listen to a podcast or maybe watch a little bit of Netflix. But when I did the Zwift League on Tuesday, which you commentated on, I took all that out pretty quickly because I just had to concentrate on the wheel in front of me. It was complete immersion in the race and trying to survive. And I didn't realize it was broadcast until a little bit later on. And if I had known that, I might have hidden somewhere else, perhaps in B or C grade.
Oh no, it was great. I love seeing familiar names and faces, and we got to talk about your cycling pedigree, Keno. Normally we're too busy talking about everybody else's, so that was a bit of fun. Now we're back to the C's. The situation hasn't changed too much, except that it's further exaggerated. Toshi remains in the lead.
Yeah.
Kaori 12 seconds behind now. They might come back together here. There's not too far left in the race though. Beth Stoner, she's a minute 10 down. Now, this will hurt her. She came in as the leader today. Very impressive ride tomorrow. She might be carrying a bit of fatigue, or she might be slightly more sprint inclined, because this is a very tough course. And if you are not a fan of the climbs, this is not the course you will naturally self-select.
Well, I wonder if Kaori is going to have the legs to be able to get back to Toshi. It's down to 11 seconds. The biggest gap that it has been out to 14 seconds. So this is a battle that is a long way from being over. They have roughly 6.4 kilometres remaining. This is Kaori that we're on board with now, and she's riding at almost 4 watts per kilo. Okada Kaori, and the cadence is really good, Kate. She doesn't have the heart rate monitor on, and that might be that it's just been a Bluetooth dropout, or it could be a strategic decision so as her rivals can't see how close she is to the red zone. But the good thing is that cadence still almost at 100 RPM.
Anytime I see cadence over 90, it's an indicator to me that they're pretty comfortable, because anywhere between 90 and 100 is a fairly efficient, the most efficient cadence zone on the road that you can get. A lot of people start dropping below. I mean, we've all been there where the legs start to hurt and you just put it in a bigger gear, kind of hoping that a few less revs per minute might increase your power a little bit and save those legs. I mean, it's often counter to what might actually be efficient. But it does show that she's in a pretty good rhythm. Those watts are fairly steady. It's good to see her getting out of the seat the minute the speed drops a little bit. I think that that's also an indicator that she's in a good place, because if she was struggling too much, then she wouldn't be able to keep it as dynamic as she is. So overall, a pretty good performance here by the Japanese riders.
And you can see at the bottom of the graphic there with Kaori, she's got the little thumbs up for the ride on. We spoke before, Kate, about when it comes up on the screen on Zwift, close the gap, and you're not sure whether that is tormenting or encouraging. The one thing that is always encouraging when you do get the thumbs up for a ride on, and when I am in a position and I've got my breath if I'm participating in an event on Zwift, and there's somebody in my group who's riding really strongly, I do give them the thumbs up, mainly out of self-interest, to encourage them to keep doing all the pacemaking at the front.
Yeah, that's a good tactic. That's a bit of a sneaky one. We chatted yesterday a bit about the nuances of communicating in Zwift. It is a bit different. There's less chat, certainly amongst teams. There's not the same chat that could happen as out on the road. You're able usually to communicate with the members of your own team, but not with other teams. So if you're in a breakaway, you have to find a good way to work together without being able to communicate really in any way. And so then the small movements you do, the small things you do in game make a big difference. And dropping a big thumbs up will certainly, I don't know, it suggests you're in a pretty good mood and you're ready to go and you're very supportive of each other. I mean, I think it's very congenial of you.
Yeah, for me, it is the Zwift version of thank you. In a lot of cases,
Yeah.
Thanks for that effort. Yeah, and when you're doing a training ride and you see somebody get a personal best, it's always good to give them the thumbs up as well. Kaori now, Kate, she's at just 8 seconds behind Toshi, so this is really closing down. They have roughly 4.4 kilometres to go. This race in C grade for the women is a long way from being over.
Well, this is really going to come down to the line with these Japanese riders. Back in this chase group, they're working really well together. I'm seeing them start to swap speeds here. And if we can see, I think it's Stoner there has the disc wheel. That indicates she's a level 45 at least Zwifter. There's 50 levels in Zwift. If you are at level 45, you spend a whole lot of time in that training studio of yours, because that disc wheel is without doubt the fastest wheel in game at all, and also a Tron bike there. So that's an indicator that these ladies are pretty experienced. So when you then translate that to, do they have the in-game skill to work cohesively together in a group? It does appear to me that they have, that the four of them are still together. That gap hasn't opened up too much, while they haven't necessarily gotten much closer, especially in the last couple of kilometres. I think they are doing a good job as a group of four to try and keep working together.
Yeah, they certainly have it pegged at around about the 1 minute and 15 second mark. They have a 12-13 second advantage on the two riders behind them that are chasing. But notably, Kate, the gap between Toshi and Kaori is now down to 6 seconds. So the battle continues. Here is the race leader, Toshi out in front. She's been in this position for a while. She has a little over 3 kilometres to go, and she has a mere 6 second gap. This is tight.
Well, this is where it starts to get interesting. We know that Toshi is a good climber simply by virtue of the fact that she's got the Tron bike, because you have to do so much climbing in game in order to earn that. We can just start seeing Kaori in the background here. Now that we can see her, she can definitely see Toshi. I tend to think it's possibly game over for the individual break. But that doesn't necessarily mean in a sprint that Toshi won't still prevail there. But this is a very, very good and solid effort by Kaori to chase this down. Toshi, look, you never know. She may not have realised quite how close she was behind, and it may give her a little bit of a push to power on a little bit more and increase that gap again. But those revs aren't particularly high. We were talking about that before, weren't we, in terms of Kaori sitting around the 80 to 90 mark and looking really good. Less than 60 to 70 here for Toshi. I'm suggesting that there's a bit of fatigue in those legs.
And the heart rate up at 170. She has less than 3 kilometres to go, and she now has just a 4 second advantage. That sort of low cadence, it reminds me of Justine Barrow, who really muscles her way over climbs with really low cadence. But Toshi is losing her advantage, and Kaori, when you can see the person in front of you, when you're doing the hunting, it is more motivating in many respects than being the hunted. The hunted can be daunting, and that is the exact position that Toshi finds herself in now. 18.3 kilometres covered, 20.5 in total for C grade. This has been a great battle between two Japanese riders, and it's a long way from being over. The others, Kate, they're racing for third place, but Kaori continues to work her way back. We're on board now with Kaori. 4 seconds she can see first, just out in front.
Well, it's all about timing in the sprint, especially on this course. The riders who may have considered that it would come down to a bunch sprint, they will have some markers on the side of the road as to when is a good time to sprint. There is actually a turn just before the final gantry that a lot of them often use as a bit of a landmark of when to accelerate and when to go. I'm not sure they'll have the opportunity to even consider that here, because I think that Kaori, this is becoming a drag race to the line, and this is really heating up. That 4 second gap isn't coming back any more than 4 seconds, but it's such, she is literally within sight. So I think both riders are absolutely at that limit. 5 seconds it's gone out to now. I want the Zwift technicians to put a mushroom cloud effect in game. That would be really good, because I think that's what we're seeing right now from both Toshi and Kaori are absolutely at the limit.
Well, this is all in with just under or just over 1 kilometre to go. We saw Kaori for a moment out to 6.1 watts per kilo. So it's no longer smooth time trial style. She's now accelerating over the little rises. But Toshi, she has the answers. She's risen to the occasion. It's back out to 6 seconds. She might just have enough to hold on. And here she is with the pink Tron.
Well, Toshi, the slightly more experienced athlete in the game, she's almost pushing up to the B category with her recent performances in Zwift, and I think she's really answered this very well. She's certainly really digging very deep at the back end here. That gap's now opened up to 8 seconds, so I think we've seen what is going to happen here. They're approaching the finish line. Toshi is going to take the win ahead of Kaori in this women's C category. A dominant ride, just some seriously impressive numbers, Matt.
It has been outstanding. Toshi takes the win in C grade for the Tour de Zwift. She gets the better of her Japanese compatriot. Kaori, she put up a big fight, Kate, but in the end, perfect use of the power-ups by Toshi. It's a 10-second gap between the two of them. Kaori in second spot. She should be proud of that performance. But Kate, the battle is on for third, and Beth Stoner, who you've spoken about quite a bit, she's in the mix to get a spot on the final podium for stage 3.
Well, Beth Stoner's definitely got to be one of the favourites, but Natasha Williams, one of the Revo cyclists, she's got quite a bit of community racing under her belt, and she packs an absolute punch when it comes down to a sprint finish. So I'd love to see how she goes. But I have seen in Zwift Power that she is at the absolute limit in terms of heart rate and power. So I think that she's done pretty well to hang on to this group. That fatigue might not help her in that final sprint. Beth Stoner, certainly the one that they're all watching. In fact, they're letting her kind of lead out and dictate the terms of this sprint. So, it wouldn't be too bad for one of the other riders to take a bit of responsibility here and take some control back.
Well, there is Beth Stoner. She has the disc wheel on. And now it's Naomi Williams, I assume, on the Tron bike, who has managed to just spurt forward. And it's Williams, with perfect timing for the sprint, who gets third place. Well played.
Well, an unreal ride from Natasha Williams. And she is known for her sprint, definitely more than her climbing ability. I have a feeling that she would have just been hanging on over those KOMs, and we saw that in the Zwift Power numbers. So it's really good for anybody watching along to also open Zwift Power in another tab and take a look at all of the live numbers coming through, because it's really interesting. It tells you a lot that we can't see in an avatar. So we normally, if we could see their face, that's taken away, but the data provides some really interesting numbers. So Natasha Williams, a great job in third there, but dominance from the Japanese riders.
Yeah, with Toshi taking out the win, Kaori in second position, Williams in third. Let's now turn our attention to the men. They're already underway. We pick it up with the A-grade race, and they're already on that first of two climbs. Kate, this course, the Bagel, it is 34.5 kilometres for A-grade. For the C and D grade, it's 20.5, just as we see in both the men's and the women's. But this group has been reduced significantly fairly early on, and the avatars even look fast, Kate.
This is an absolutely brutal course. We can see a lot of Tron bikes there, so a lot of people kind of upping the ante. And again, if you see a Tron bike, they've done a fair bit of climbing and are used to that. Nathan Guerra is probably one to watch today. He did very well yesterday in the time trial with the top 10, but then second in the crit. And I know that he performs pretty well on climbs like this. He has a background in mountain biking. Mountain bikers tend to be fairly dynamic climbers. Aussie, look at that, Matt. We saw him yesterday take a lot of the responsibility in that criterium at the front, and he is back and wanting people to know that he is serious, and he's sitting on the front again, closely followed by Brendan Trekkie Johnson, who we heard from yesterday.
Yeah, and Trekkie was pretty good on yesterday's stage. He finished in 8th position. Aussie, I would have given Aussie 50s the prize for the most combative on yesterday's stage. He was super aggressive. Didn't manage to squeeze into the top few placings in the end, unfortunately for him. But I love the attitude. He's bouncing straight back on this tough bagel course around the streets of New York, and he is throwing everything he's got at the race. So too is Trekkie. 7.7 watts per kilo. He really is applying the pressure.
So they've made it over the first KOM now, and they do have that. It's not until about the 24.5 kilometre mark now. They're about 8K in presently that they do have to deal with that second KOM. The New York KOM, the forward way, we've just gone up the reverse way. So I think the groups that we're seeing now, we might see this settle into a bit of rhythm and a bit of routine. What we do know is that the numbers here are far, far smaller than what we saw throughout the criterium yesterday. Let's take a look at Nathan Guerra's numbers there on board with him. His watts are pretty solid, over 300 watts, 95 revs. Again, that's that kind of sweet spot zone where we can take a guess that he's pretty comfortable. 149 heart rate. He's sitting at the back of the bunch in the draft looking after himself. I would be putting a big target on his back based on these numbers. I don't think he's had to work too hard at all.
I think you just put the target on his back for him. Perfect. And based on
Sorry,
the fact
Nathan.
that we're not sorry at all, Nathan. Based on the fact that his heart rate's at 150, he's gone up the first climb, breathing through a straw. He's doing it easily. But Kate, look at who's in second position. Well, he's now in third. It's Cadell Lahowie from the under 17 category. That is outstanding to see such a youngster so far forward. But Trekkie Johnson, a former winner of the Melbourne to Warrnambool, he's at the front. In fact, I think he was last year's winner. He's at the front. He's putting some pressure on. He's opened up a 2-second gap. And look at the horsepower. 6.3 watts per kilo, over 400. He really is motoring.
Well, I'm not sure that he necessarily meant to open that gap up. He didn't put in a big attack. He didn't go into the orange numbers that we discussed yesterday to really launch a searing attack on the group. I think it just started to open up. And it's that moment of truth, isn't it, Matt, where you realise that your pace has a few people herding behind you and you have to decide what to do about that. Do you capitalise on it and keep going? Or do you think, no, I'm doing okay? It's the old, what we talked about in the opener. When do you attack? Not when you're comfortable, not when everybody else is comfortable.
I think he's doing all he can to try and capitalise on it because he's using the power up. It was the feather. He's got some company, and guess who it is? It's the man with the target on his back. Nathan Guerra has bridged across to Trekkie Johnson.
Well, there's nobody in this field that's more experienced in the game aspect of how to ride in a group, how to pull turns quite smoothly than Nathan Guerra. So I think that this is a very dangerous combination. We saw him drop a power up. Now, my take on that is that when they go through the banner for the sprint, and there is no sprint in terms of bonus points, but they will be able to get a new power up. So he will be dropping that one to make sure he gets a new one and see what he can do with that. If Trekkie and Nathan Guerra can form a little group here, I think we could have a dangerous situation. But interesting, it looks like Guerra may have dropped back a little bit into the bunch. He's used a bit of energy to pull that back in. It's almost a bit of mind games, I would say. Like, hey, look, you might think you have a gap, but look how easy it is for us to bridge it. You know, I'm going to go back to the back now and relax. It's kind of a bit of a dominant power play, I reckon.
There's Trekkie riding for the Aussie Hump Day Ride crew. Having fun? That's a yeah, because he's jumped out. And a little bit of an attack there by Trekkie. Look at the power. The road goes up ever so slightly. We're going into that orange zone, Kate. 9 watts per kilo. One attack has been nullified. Trekkie goes again. Huge numbers. You'll be happy with the cadence. It's still flirting with 90.
He looks really comfortable. That was a big move and a big attack. We saw when we see somebody go into the orange, that is danger territory. A couple of the other riders have been a little bit slow to react. A few of them also went into the red zone to keep right up there. But he's certainly keeping the pace on and keeping the pressure on. Even if those gaps aren't opening yet, he's kind of laying the foundation to break a few legs so that when they do go over that next KOM, everybody will be carrying a fair bit of fatigue up there. I'm just seeing Luke Cridland's name jump up. He's gone to the front now. He's a pretty experienced bike rider, been a bike rider since he was about 3 or 4 years of age from a big cycling family in Sydney. It's great to see him take on the virtual world as well. It kind of adds another dynamic element to a lot of these races' catalogues.
Well, one name that is missing from the top 10, I haven't seen him pop up as yet, and that is the overall race leader, Kieran Lewis. And this is a course that I think suits Kieran. Either something has gone wrong or he's just sitting patiently down around about 15th to 20th position, waiting for his moment.
Well, a couple of the names in the top 10 that are starting to move to the front that are really grabbing my attention. We've got, of course, Nathan Guerra is floating around, but Taylor Charlton sitting in 8th at the moment. He laid down one of the bigger attacks in the criterium yesterday. I think that he's got pretty good legs and needs to find a good way to use them, which this kind of course will certainly give him that opportunity too. Ryan Thomas has been floating in and out of that top 10 as well. It's starting to string out a bit, and it is, from my take, more important for those top riders to make their way into the front half of that bunch rather than sitting in the back half. So Charlton, he needs to increase that cadence a little bit and make sure the legs don't get too heavy and too fatigued. But his numbers suggest that he's got pretty good form at the moment.
Also suggests that there is plenty of pace on, as Taylor Charlton at 183 beats per minute, a strong triathlete. So if he does get an opportunity to go solo, we know that triathletes, they're not afraid of riding on their own, doing an individual time trial. It could be a good course for Charlton. So too, here he is, the man with the broken hand. Ryan Thomas from ARA rides Sunshine Coast, punching out some big numbers, 400 smiling watts from Ryan Thomas, and he's right where he needs to be, Kate. He's in amongst the thick of the action.
Well, when you see power numbers like that that are quite high and quite elevated, you know that you're dealing with quite an experienced cyclist when you also then look at their heart rate, and their heart rate isn't too elevated. If you can have those power spikes between 300 and 400, it makes you quite dynamic in the group. It allows you to hold the wheel without ever really going into the red zone. And so I think the numbers are really showing us that Ryan Thomas is pretty serious about being out there today. He has moved right up to the front. He kind of sensed the danger there of Trekkie when he went. I mean, we have done our research. We've looked on Zwift Power. We know what these guys are capable of in game and out of game. When you see someone like Trekkie Johnson go, you don't sit at the back and wait for what's next. I mean, that is a warning bell if ever there was one.
For sure. And on your point about Ryan Thomas and looking at some of the other numbers that we saw there as well, his cadence was around 102, 103. So he's well and truly on top of the gear. His heart rate made it look as if he was fairly composed. So I think that Ryan could be in for a good day. And as we spoke to him yesterday, he has been inspired by Matt Hayman's miraculous win at Paris-Roubaix on the back of a fractured arm and then spending 6 weeks in the garage. Ryan was involved in a huge crash in the National Road Series at the back end of 2020, and he is fighting back to start 2021 on the front foot with real vengeance.
It's a very good way to keep your training pretty dynamic and pretty interesting. And obviously with a broken bone, it's allowing him to continue that journey to fitness with those national championships coming up. As well, this is playing a really important part in his preparation for that, actually, in order to get those race days on. And that's a very different environment than what we were looking at even a year ago, when a lot of these riders would be doing the Bay Crits or something like that. All of a sudden, Zwift has really stepped up as a way for the athletes to prepare for in real life racing. And this has become as important piece of the puzzle as anything before. So I think that that's a pretty exciting and kind of leveling benchmark for all of the athletes across the board. Now, this bunch is whittled down even further. It was quite a huge group yesterday in the criterium. We knew that there would be a lot of gaps opening up over that first KOM, but it has whittled down even further thanks to Trekkie Johnson's attacks and the pace he's been setting. They're clipping along now. They're actually moving very fast. I feel like they're kind of getting ready for what's to come.
This is Gaffney, who we're on board with. This is back with the B grade group, and they've splintered in a really similar fashion to what we've seen in the A grade group. They're also riding the 34.5 kilometres of the bagel. C grade and D grade, they do the 20 kilometres. There's one rider in D grade, Kate, Scott Hunter. He's a local Tasmanian firefighter. He's riding the D grade event. But when he was training for Ironman triathlons, he used to do a bit of pre-season training with the likes of Wes Salzberger and also Richie Port. He has a fantastic Instagram account capturing much of his riding outdoors and some of his adventures. We now move down to the next grade. This is D grade. This is Anderson, who is leading. 9.7 kilometres covered for Anderson. And Kate, he's already opened up a gap of 26 seconds. He's got more than halfway to go. But based on the fact that he's been able to open up this gap on the climb, Anderson could be strong enough to do a Phil Anderson and ride through to the finish and take the jersey.
It's a pretty solid show so far. It's certainly suggests that he's in for a big ride. And if you can open that kind of gap early in the race, then it's certainly not beyond the pale to think that he would be able to maintain that pace for the rest. Now, we can see some riders going in the other direction. This is what we're talking about with this course being a bit of a bagel loop-de-loop. They do go up and down both sides of this KOM. So they go up the forward side and also up the reverse side, and similarly, they go both ways through the sprint. It does pay to have reconned the course. So the riders who have reconned the course and know the flavour of the climbs and also the transitions between the KOMs and the sprints, they will definitely have an advantage.
This is C grade, so this is the Mighty Metropolitan, which is 20.5 kilometres. The same course that we just saw, that brilliant race between two Japanese riders in the C grade women's race. Chadwick it is who are on board with at the moment. This is the leading group just about, or they've got a couple of seconds to the few riders in front of them, but there's 4 of them in this group. So again, they could take full advantage of the fact that they're over the climb. They've got the hard part, most of it done anyway, and they can start to work together and use that numerical advantage to close down the gap to the leaders.
Well, one of the riders that's in this group that really interests me is Gotting Pfeiffer. The German rider. He's just sitting comfortably in the middle of this group. He's quite a different profile rider to the others. He's much more powerful. He's less inclined to enjoy the climbs, would be one way to put it. Much like myself, I must say that you kind of grovel over the climbs. For him to still be there at this stage in the race and with a good group, that's pretty good. I mean, it would have hurt him to get over that KOM with these other riders. But if it does come down to a sprint at the end, he's in a pretty plumb position to perform well there.
Yes.
So I don't expect him to be doing too much of the work at the front. He is, though. He's pulling his weight. But to be honest, he's probably the one rider in this group who could get away with, if that's how I can say it, get away with sitting on without getting too many dirty looks. Hard to give a dirty look in the virtual world anyway. And back to A grade here. Keno?
That was the leading group of C grade, 5 riders out in front, and we'll watch those results closely to see if Pfeiffer, the German, does get the victory. Back on board with the A grade group, and still it's the same size group that we saw when they went over the first climb. There's been no splits since, despite the efforts of Brendan Johnson, Trekkie, to launch a few attacks. He had some company with Nathan Guerra. Ryan Thomas were on board with from the ARA team, a team that was created by Ben Kirsten and also Matt Wilson, and is effectively managed by both Stu Shaw and Henk Vogel. So they've got some experience looking after that team. And Kate, the team is doing a fantastic job of helping those riders not just chase their cycling careers, but also support them with an education through the Sunshine Coast University.
Well, something I've actually really come to appreciate, especially watching the Zwift racing, is how many of the athletes in game have so much else going on. They're studying, their jobs, their parents, and it's really a balancing act. And to be honest, it's also showcasing a lot of their physical abilities in game. I don't think it comes at the cost of the other. So I don't think that going to university is something you have to do if you're not pursuing professional cycling. I do think that you can do it all together, and it's brilliant to have that kind of leadership for the young Aussie men, because a lot of these riders, they are aspiring to move into the World Tour ranks, to ride a Tour de France, and they might be engineers, carpenters, accountants on their journey to do that, which I think is a very well-rounded approach to the sport.
And this year we've seen that example with Neve Bradbury in the women and Jay Vine in the men, getting that opportunity via Zwift to go to the next level, to the international level, 2 teams that ride the biggest races in the world. We've got confirmation of the results from the C grade women's race, and that was one of the more entertaining races with the big battle at the end. Kaori almost got across to catch Toshi, who took out the victory on the stage by just a handful of seconds. As we still pay attention to the A-grade race, Aussie, 50 years Inc., the riders over 50 years of age, is pouring on the pressure once again. Trekkie Johnson wants a piece of the action, and those watts per kilo numbers, Kate Bates, they are huge.
Those orange, every time I see the orange, you know it's pretty serious. They've only got about 5k left before they hit that KOM, a little bit less before they hit the slopes of that next KOM. That caused a whole lot of damage that first time around. I think it will do so as well. We've only got 19 riders in this front group. Honestly, by the top of the KOM, I would be very surprised if we didn't have a couple of groups of one or two. And then that makes it interesting, chasing those final couple of kilometres into the finish.
And this front group looks as if it is splitting ever so slightly. Luke Cridlin, who you spoke about before, coming from a strong cycling family, he's right up near the front. Aussie 50s Inc. is again putting on the pressure. He was certainly the most aggressive around Crit City yesterday, and he's proving to be aggressive again to get today. He's not daunted by the fact that there's some riders in this group who are 20, 30 years younger than him.
Oh, age is just a number. I mean, that's something that you say when you're a little bit older, but it does prove pretty true in the Zwift world. This is a chance for the riders before they do hit this next KOM, which is the final one for the course. There's about 6 kilometres from the top of that, descending down into Central Park before they hit a sprint. This is their chance to take a drink. This is their chance to get out of their seat and shake their legs around, drop those shoulders away from the ears, open the lungs up and get comfortable, because they are about to get very uncomfortable.
Taylor Charlton sitting there in 5th position. Just waiting patiently, needs to make the most of that little bit of a vortex that you get in this small group. And when you're in there and your avatar's right in that sweet spot, Kate, mentally you're saying, don't move, stay here. But you need to be smooth with your power and not drift back and not go forward. It's a lot easier said than done.
There are a lot of different challenges, I think, in the virtual racing, one of which is that you cannot stop pedaling for a single second. So in real life, you can take the pressure off, you can get out of your seat, freewheel a little bit, especially when you're in the draft, and it's not too bad. If you do that in Zwift, you will get ejected out the back with such ferocity that you wonder if you had a power outage. It is not a good idea to do that when you're in a bunch ride, and that really takes a toll on the legs, far more than those intermittent efforts that we see that's more characteristic of any kind of normal bunch ride. And so any chance they have to ease off and take a bit of a break, they really need to take that, because once it is on, there's just kind of no turning back. And I think in the next couple of kilometres, we're really going to see this sort out a little bit.
And you can see then just how quickly Aussie went from being right at the front to at the back of this very select group, and now he's going straight back to the front once again. So it's gas on, gas off, but you can't afford to completely punch the clutch in, as you referred to. There's no stopping pedaling, there's no braking to go around corners. It is consistently on. Just noting that name that we put the target on earlier, Kate, Nathan Guerra. He's in this group. He's looking pretty good. He's had a moment of trying to recuperate, obviously, from that attack where he joined Trekkie Brendan Johnson, who's now at the front. And I'm expecting big things, no pressure, from Nathan Guerra.
Yeah, I think this is the opportunity for any riders who are very confident in their climbing ability, who have good legs and feel good. This KOM is the opportunity for them to go because it gets a lot harder to create a break when they're down in more flat land on the tarmac of Central Park. This will definitely prove to be one of the more divisive moments of the race. They're around the 21k mark, so they've got about 3k left until they hit the bottom of that KOM. But isn't it interesting that even with still a couple of k left to go, we can see they're kind of lining up and positioning themselves to be ready for it. We can see Nathan, he looks pretty relaxed actually. I wonder if Nathan, can you hear us? How are you feeling? You can give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Oh, excellent.
Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Yeah, feeling better now. Ozzy put the hammer down, dude. It was like full gas over those first little bumps. I was not expecting to be in trouble over those bumps into Rainbow Road, into the Mario Kart roads. So, but better now. I'm starting to come around.
What are you
I'm 3 days
anticipating
in a
next?
race and not just 2. Trekkie rested up, obviously, after his attacks. I think him and maybe Purificati and Cridlin are gonna go full gas with Near and Ozzy. I'm gonna follow. I wanna sprint these boys.
You got any power-ups?
So that's what's up. No power-ups, I've gotten all XP. I've gotten pretty much all XP, so we gotta roll the dice on the next one.
All right, well, get ready. You're not too far away from it. We're going to be watching you really closely and anticipating those attacks. At the moment, Nathan, you look pretty comfortable, 152 beats per minute. Good luck, pal.
Thanks a lot. If they're comfortable, they're comfortable.
Kate, that's
Great
exactly
job.
what you spoke about earlier on. If he's comfortable, they're comfortable, so that's not the time to go.
No, and you know, Nathan, he knows Zwift strategy because not only has he done a whole heap of racing in game as well as in real life, of course, but he also does a lot of the broadcasting for the community league. He commentates on it, so he has probably seen more Zwift racing than we have combined. I think when you put someone like that out, what's really surprising for me to have heard is he said, I wasn't expecting that from Aussie. So it goes to show that even with somebody so experienced like Nathan, he can still get surprised by a rider's tactics. So, you know, kudos to Aussie because I think he's really thrown it out there and changed the fabric of the race probably more than he even realised.
And look who's on the front right now, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously got good legs because for him to have done so much work, we saw it in the crit yesterday, we were impressed by that. And again today, I think that that's probably also his comfort level is to be at the front. And you are more in control when you're on the front, I will say that. And we can see on board with him there, his power numbers are reasonably good. It would be easy to say that his cadence is possibly a bit low, but we do need to consider that at this point it's over 10% that they are climbing up. So let's not be too hard on the gear selection. I think at this point you're just trying to kind of survive through it. Can I just say it's pretty interesting to watch Aussie go from the front of the bunch to the back there, and I'm not necessarily worried about that because sometimes when somebody is questioning their climbing ability a bit, they will start the climb at the front in order to give themselves a bit of a buffer to then drift to the back. So Aussie so far has been pretty strategically robust, so I'm not too concerned for him at this point.
And his numbers are still huge, but the gap is opening up and he's riding at more than 400 watts, close to 6 watts per kilo. The cadence is around about that 80 mark, so he's really trying to muscle his way back into contention. Eno it is at the front, followed by Chadwick, and this is a big move that we're seeing as Aussie is still pouring on some huge numbers here, Kate. This is Nair, who we spoke about, Zach Nair, who, well, Nathan spoke about. This is a rider who he anticipated would go on the attack. The results are in for C grade, and it was an impressive performance over there. I think it was Anderson who rode really strongly to take the win in C grade. Meanwhile, at the front of the race for A grade, Nair it is, who's applying plenty of pressure in that heart rate, Kate. It's close to the 185 mark.
Yeah, he's really pushing it, and that's what he needs to do because this is the point of the race that can really make the big difference as to who goes in. Riders like Aussie that we saw, and even Nathan, Guerra to a degree, the only thing they need to do is be within distance over the top, you know, within a couple of seconds so that they can chase that back with numbers. So these small gaps that are opening up don't worry me too much. Nair obviously has very good legs. But, you know, again, I think that strength in numbers a bit. So if there is a big chasing pack, that's 7-8 kilometres to the finish, that will be very hard to stay away if you're solo.
Well, the pressure that he's applying, he was at 600 watts for quite a sustained period there. And we've got Tabalong doing some chasing along with Cridlin. And our man Nathan Guerra, he's at just 2-3 seconds behind. Nair is now into the super tuck position momentarily. So one of those brief moments of respite, and there aren't many of them in any of the Zwift races.
Well, they've gone over that KOM now. So that was the hardest point that they had in front of them. Now it's more a matter of consolidating any gaps that may have opened up. It will be a difficult run on your own. I mean, I think that's kind of when you're attacking over a climb and there is this distance to the finish, there is a part of you that hopes at least someone will come with you, one person, so that you do get that ability to work with another rider pushing onto the finish. But now that this gap has been opened up, he's got no choice except to keep it going. There's a big, look at this big chase group. This actually surprises me how many have regrouped over the top of that climb. There might be a few tired legs which stopped it breaking up even more than that. But from this, I would suggest it will come back together and be a sprint for the finish.
Yeah, and they're just over 2 seconds behind, and we saw them as they blasted past the camera from that angle. Lots of them in the super tuck position. Trekkie, Brendan Johnson down there in 10th position, Matt Robinson, Nathan Guerra. This is a really strong group. This is the kind of group with Ryan Thomas in there as well. They've got the numbers, they've got the horsepower, they've got the smarts, they've got the experience. I think that we could see a bunch sprint finish of 10 to 12 riders here, Kate.
Well, this is a bit of a danger spot coming up for the riders that are in the super tuck. And the reason for that is once you hit flatter than -3% downhill, it automatically ejects you from that super tuck position. If you're not already putting the power through the pedals, if you have taken that time to sit up, you can actually quite violently get kicked out the back of the bunch as they continue to accelerate past you. So the riders really need to have been paying attention there, because we might get a few legs hurting in response to that. But it makes sense in your head to jump into that super tuck as soon as you can. And it is essentially what we've seen Peter Sagan do. You accelerate, you stop pedaling, and your avatar will drop into that super tuck. The first time you do it, you feel pretty clever. It's pretty good. So we've seen also just a flurry of power-ups being dropped as well. That's because they just went through a gantry, so we'll be able to collect some new ones.
And there's that moment when you've got a power up there, you're getting close to being able to collect another one, and you figure, I may as well use it and give myself 10 or 15 seconds of just a little bit of easier breathing.
Well, it looks like Nathan Guerra has gotten over the front. He's back with that front group. That's what he said he wanted to do. He said he wanted to sprint against these guys. That sounds like he's having a bit of fun with it, doesn't it? It does. So far, so good.
He's in the right spot. He has been having fun. And I liked his honesty and his appraisal when we had a brief chat to him. And for Nathan, this is his third day of racing. In addition to doing the Tour de Oz stages 1 and 2 yesterday, he also raced the day prior to that, which was a Friday Australian time. So he's doing a 3-day tour here, Nathan Guerra. You can see the US flag next to his name. He's a rider with loads of experience in both producing broadcasts on Zwift, racing on Zwift, and commentating on Zwift, and calling his own races when he's in the race and punching out 400 plus watts.
Well, we do see quite a number of riders who have their own Twitch channel. And so they broadcast a lot of their own races, and you can see them racing. There's an American cyclist, Brian Kellison, who also runs a team and runs a Twitch channel, and it's quite interesting to cross over to him. Again, when you see those numbers and you think, he doesn't look like he's in too much trouble, and then you'll pop that feed in and see that he's really wrenching and reefing over the bike. So it can add a whole nother dynamic to it altogether. They don't have too long to go here, but they are stretching out a little bit and keeping that pace high. What I've noticed on this course particularly is the propensity for the riders to sprint too early, to open up that sprint too early. So there does need to be a bit of tactical consideration going to the finish and some landmarks for anybody who's done a good recon. Attacks starting to go off the front here. This is a bit dangerous. You don't want to let anything go at this stage in the race, because then somebody has to chase. And it looks to me like Luke Cridland has taken advantage of that. The group behind are kind of looking at each other. They don't appear to be single file and chasing just yet. So this might actually turn into a very dangerous move from Cridland.
And Kate, I'm assuming the STG next to the name of Luke Cridland stands for St. George, which is one of the strongest cycling clubs in Australia and with a great history.
Yeah, a lot of experience has come through that club, and a lot of great riders on the international level, Olympic champions, to mentor the young riders. So it's good to see Luke really throwing the gauntlet down here. He's not necessarily known for his, he's more of a climber, not necessarily the kind of rider you would think you would pin on a late attack heading into a sprint. But, you know, he's caught them a bit unawares. He's got a 4-second gap. That is definitely starting to get out of sight around the twists and turns of Central Park here. So the group's got to start getting organised if they want to bring this back.
He still has around about 3 kilometres to go. Ryan Thomas it is, who's at 4 seconds behind. Nair is in there amongst the chase. And so too is Matt Robinson, Trekkie, Nathan Guerra, who we've spoken about quite a bit. This is a strong chasing group behind Luke Cridland, but this is an impressive performance. Kate, how much longer can he maintain 6.5 to 7 watts per kilo? They're big, big numbers.
Yeah, I think this is a big ask, but so far he's really laying it down, and that gap isn't closing down at all. So the chasing group also needs to work together a bit here. They're all from different teams. We're not seeing any, real team effort at the back there. So the individual riders will have to kind of think, can we get some of the others to come along and chase here? Because Cridland's still putting out consistently higher power than that chase group. He's at 6 watts per kilo, which is, really putting the effort in. But the chase group, it's a little bit up and down. Nathan Guerra going into the orange there and making a bit of a move. It does look like they've increased pace significantly, because that gap, visually, we can see it's closing down a little bit, but they need to keep pushing it to make sure they get across to Cridland.
They're about to reel Cridland back in. He's down to 2 seconds. He's almost been caught. And prophetically, Wes Salzberger, about 7 minutes ago, he posted the question, fast run to the finish, look out for a flyer. And it was then only moments later that Luke Cridland made that move. This is Nathan Guerra, who we're on board with. He's sitting just behind Luke Cridland. They're getting soaked up by another group of riders. There's still more than 10 in contention to take out this third and final stage of the Tour de Oz. This is Brendan Johnson, Trekkie. He sits in about, first position, according to this. He's taken a flyer. He's got a gap now of around about 2 seconds on the chasers, and it's Matt Robinson now who is leading the chase. This is the sort of move that Brendan Johnson is capable of pulling off.
This is a very dangerous move. He's dropping the power-ups, he's dropping the feather there. The road is only kicking up slightly, but that feather will allow him to continue to push that acceleration and open that gap. It's out to 3 seconds now to Nathan Guerra, who looks like he's heading the chase. But look at all these orange numbers that we're seeing from Nair, from Wazalius. These are Nair, Wazalius and Guerra are probably the 3 riders to watch if it does come down to a sprint. They're the ones with the really high 15-second power profiles, which will come in handy, especially if they're going to sprint long. But Trekkie Johnson is throwing it all out there. We can see we're on board with him. He's working hard. He's certainly not sitting around waiting for them to catch him. His heart rate's up. That cadence is still in that real sweet spot. That said to me, he looks like he's got a breakaway mate here in Charlton, who was really impressive in the criterium yesterday. This is pretty dangerous if these two can work together.
In fact, it's Nair who's managed to go across to him. Charlton is trying to chase. Charlton is at 4 seconds behind. And you can see the way Trekkie bowed their head, Kate. He had to pick up the pace to get into the slipstream of Nair, the next rider from the United States of America. 460 watts. 6.7 watts per kilo, Brendan Johnson, 176 beats per minute. And the cadence, Kate, you'll be happy with that. I know you're a stickler for paying attention to cadence, 97. Trekkie is in the red zone, but he's staying composed.
Well, it's a good breakaway mate to have with Nair. You can see the big power differences there that drafting effect offers. So Trekkie's sitting over 6 watts per kg, but Nair was able to sit down. He's gone now. He's hitting him. He's in the orange. What a brutal attack he has launched over the top of Trekkie Johnson. It does look like that gap is opening up a little bit. We're coming into this sprint finish here, and Nair has taken it away with a really well-timed jump there at the finish. Trekkie just couldn't respond in the same way, and a very well-earned win there from Zachary Nair.
That was perfect timing. Just seeing the finish line, he was in the slipstream of Trekkie Johnson, and you saw the numbers jump up to 14 watts per kilo. Zach Nair, outstanding performance. Trekkie Johnson, he tried to go solo. He looked to use that long-range strength, but Nair was smart enough to get across at the right time and quick enough to get the better of Brendan Johnson in the sprint. His timing was ideal.
It was, and I don't know if you noticed, but Nair kind of had a bit of a retro avatar setup where he had like some brown leather-looking gloves and shoes. He had a bit of a moustache and some aviator glasses. So it strikes me that he has a bit of fun in game as well.
Oh, Brendan Johnson, we got into his garage a few times. He's got the setup really well organised. He's got the giant sponsorship right next to him. Let's see if we can have a few words from the man who finished in second place. Trekkie, you almost had it, and then Zach just got the better of you in the last few hundred metres.
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty happy to stay away. I wasn't even looking at the screen, to be honest. I was looking at my handlebars and just wanted to make the finish with off the front. So, it just finishes a really good 2 days of, sort of top end work in the shed before the TDU next week, this week.
We know clearly that you weren't looking at the screen because we were trying to get a visual on your facial expression, and all I could see was the top of your hair.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's better not to know, and just I could hear you guys calling out the watt, so that was enough info for me. And sometimes on the trainer you just you go even further into the hole. So
did the race play out
Kate,
as you expected over those KOMs? Because we were really expecting quite a lot of fireworks, especially in that second KOM.
Yeah, I think there was that top 10 sort of field. I don't know all of them, but I know they're certainly strong. And I think the difference is not massive between abilities. So if you can kind of snivel over there in the top 10, there's usually 3 or 4 that are motivated to roll back onto the front, and then it's sort of neutralized again. But so those climbs certainly make it hard to run to the finish because 7K to go with some rollers. It's not a flat run in, so there's still opportunity for a little break.
One last one from me before we let you go. You mentioned the fact that you're going across to Adelaide to ride the event that is in place of the Tour Down Under. How much can you translate your form from in the garage on Zwift across to the road in the real world?
It's probably the opposite for me. I mean, I've been doing a lot on the road over the summer. Probably trained the most I ever have coming into these few races we've got coming up. And then it's good to get on Zwift and even with a bit of fatigue, still be competitive. So, I'm pleased. Zwift is sort of a really good level, and if you jump on and you know where, then it's a good way to tell how you're going. And I think, with that build today, I'm pretty happy with how the shape was, even with a bit of fatigue in the legs from some hard training on the road.
Oh, you should be happy. Congratulations on a strong performance, and good luck for the races to come.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the coverage.
You've got the garage set up well, doesn't he, Kate?
Yeah, he does. I mean, I think there's a lot of tweaking that goes into the perfect Zwift setup. It's definitely all about the fans. Your body reacts very differently when you don't have fans, and you heat up a lot more on that indoor trainer. So I think that's an important one. But you also mentioned you've got the biggest television you can fit inside your garage. And I've seen some people get pretty creative with projector screens, making sure that they can see all of those details so much. An interesting comment from Trekkie that he wasn't necessarily watching so much, but he was listening to the numbers, and that was enough for him to kind of understand what was going on. So I think there are a lot of different dynamics in the Zwift world, and they need to kind of figure out the setup that works exactly for them. And I think he's got his pretty dialed.
Yeah, he has got it dialed. Another guy who had things dialed was Nathan Guerra. He wasn't too far off the mark today. Nathan, how did that all finish up for you?
So I am streaming on Twitch at the same time, and the frustration at the end was real, that's for sure, because I chased a lot of stuff back, lots of little momentum's coming through, lots of slingshotting. And Pierre Ficati made a good move I thought might stick to go to Trekkie in that last 180 turnaround going into the final 2K. And then Trekkie was still at the front, and I did the worst momentum move. I kind of went to the front, and the moment my avatar went backwards, Nair, I saw 12 watts per kilometer, I was like, that's probably it. And I was like, maybe go. Instead, I went in my mind, and I did the questioning thing where no, it'll come back because you just don't want to suffer anymore. And I think I could have came across, but solid on them. I should have went again. That was the move. And Nair played it perfect. He sat and waited until that last 1.5, hit the climb with momentum, went across, 2 up off the front in the last 1K to 1.5. Perfect by Zach. I mean, he earned that win in smarts and power for sure. So great racing though. Lots of fun.
Well, Kate put the target on your back. Kate, you did put the big target on Nathan's back.
I did. Sorry, Nathan. I just know that you really know in-game so much, and I thought certainly from a strategic point of view, you were definitely the one to watch. I was interested when Trekkie was away, and it looked like as a chase group, you weren't really working together as a group. I mean, nobody's from the same team. Did you feel like it was each man for himself, and that kind of lessened the chance of you guys being able to get back as a whole group?
Yeah, the only way you can make a group like that work together is by punching. So when you start punching, then everyone has to start increasing, and you kind of get this roller coaster going. So that was my goal, was like when it didn't take too much to make the speed come up, like maybe kick over a little bump or apply the pressure on a downhill quick, then everybody else has to respond, and you can get the roller coaster going without having teammates. You can just, they either come with you or they're dropped. So that's kind of what the tactic is then in that last 3K, if it's going to just come down to punching.
Well, and by punching,
Nathan,
of course, you mean accelerating, because I'm thinking of some physicality happening there.
Road rash, old school
like.
road rash. We got to get the fist going.
I love the language of Zwift racing. So you're normally a really nice guy, Nathan, but so far you've spoken about roller coasters, slingshots, and punching.
Yeah, it's definitely battle. I mean, when we get out there, you're thinking war, right? You get like, it's fight or flight, so it's a lot of fun though. I mean, that's what we live for here, right?
Yeah, awesome, mate. You've been so entertaining both when you were racing, just watching your avatar, and the interviews as well. Thanks so much for your time.
See you guys. Great job.
Kate, I can assure you he's actually really nice, despite all the talk about slingshots and punching and roller coasters.
Yeah, look, I think cycling language can be pretty interesting to start with. I remember describing to non-cycling people that I did well because I was aggressive and I attacked a few people and I sat on them. And look, it is not the kind of terminology you can apply in the real world without a little bit of confusion. But it is good to see that they
slipped up the inside on the last corner,
and you hit him. I mean,
Yeah.
It sounds quite different from the reality, but it is really good to see that they have a lot of fun with it, but they take it deadly serious. I mean, there is no mucking around in the Zwift world. They are absolutely out there to get a big result.
Yeah, and speaking of the results, I'm not sure if they're in a position yet to take a look at the results or not, but Zach Nair, what a brilliant performance, getting the timing just right to get the sprint ahead of Trekkie Johnson. And I think that with that replacement race, the Santos Adelaide Cycling Festival, for a guy like Trekkie Johnson to get an opportunity, Kate, to ride against World Tour riders, some from the Bike Exchange team, Richie Port will be there as well. There's no pressure, there's just opportunity.
It is, and I mean, I think it's a big opportunity for all of the riders to get fit for what's ahead. Ryan Thomas is another one. We'll have a chat to him in a second if we can. Ryan, mate, you had another pretty good day out there. How was it?
Yeah, it was good. It was quite a tough race. I haven't actually done that full circuit before, so that was quite enjoyable. I wasn't really sure when the hills were coming up exactly, but listening to you, Kate, was good because I was kind of expecting the climbs.
Yeah, I mean,
we heard from Nathan.
Courses in the Zwift world.
Yeah.
We heard from Nathan Guerra before talking about getting the timing of momentum right. And not knowing the course, that puts you at a distinct disadvantage in terms of getting the timing spot on.
Yeah, it was really hard. The last climb, actually, I wasn't quite ready. I was sitting at the back, and then it started, and I seen everyone going into orange on the side, and I was kind of worried that I was going to lose contact. But it's definitely an advantage knowing the course, and if you don't, then you can get yourself caught out pretty quick.
On another note, thanks for changing the camera angle today. We can see straight through those bars and get a good look.
Yeah, I thought I'd change it around a bit, keep it interesting.
So what do you do now until the national championships? Because I assume that with your hands on that position, you won't be going to Adelaide.
No Adelaide for me, unfortunately, and I'm in Brisbane, so I wouldn't have been able to go anyway. But hopefully I get my cast off this week, and then I'll be doing a lot of Ks on the road, trying to build that endurance. I've got the power thanks to Zwift, but doing a 5-hour race at Nationals is going to be a bit of a worry if I've only been training for a couple of hours on Zwift.
Yeah, it is a little bit different, those extra kilometres. And then the famous climb up Mount Buninyong. Do you like it?
Yeah, I really like Mount Buninyong. I haven't had much luck there or success, but hopefully I can change that around. A different approach this year on Zwift, and then going onto the road, so that might work for me.
Now's a good time to start. If Matt Heyman,
climb in Zwift, sorry Matt, I was just going to say the volcano climb in Zwift is a pretty good one that's similar to Mount Buninyong. So get on that, do some laps around the volcano, and that might give you a little bit of a similar profile.
Yeah, I'll just do 18 laps of that. That'll get me ready.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, if Matt Heyman can beat Tom Bonan on the back of 6 weeks on Zwift in the garage, you're a chance at the national championships. Really enjoyed chatting to you over the last 2 days, Ryan. Good luck with the recovery, and I'll see you up in Ballarat.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the coverage. It's been great.
Kate, Ryan Thomas has been entertaining. The ARA team, I've got big expectations from them, not just at the national championships, also in Adelaide and right throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think that, they've got a lot of enthusiasm to get back into racing as well. We all know it's been a pretty challenging last 12 months in terms of ability to do that, and it's kind of unfortunate for Ryan that the first time they did really get back into racing, he ended up in that crash and broke his wrist. But I think the guys on the Sunshine Coast, they've got a really well-drilled unit, and I know that Hank has been working really hard with them to stay mentally very on track. I think physically it's one thing to remain fit and to remain strong when you're not able to race too much, but to keep your head screwed on, and that's where the experience of Hank Vogels and Ben Kirsten, Matt Wilson, it's invaluable. And I think, maybe even more than ever over the last year, our mentors of the riders have really come into importance.
Yeah, it certainly has. Let's now take a look at the results from each of the races that we've got the results in for from the Tour de Oz at Stage 3. It was an entertaining day of racing. In the men's race, in the overall classification, it was Nair who managed to get the win up ahead of Tabalong, and the gap there in the end was just 2 seconds. So, Kate, that move by Zach at the end of the stage was everything that was required to win the general classification.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're looking at the general classification, and some of the names at the top, Tabalong, Purificati, Wazalius, we didn't see a lot of them in the race, animating it, which is very smart of them because they were just maintaining their place in that overall GC, and they did a really good job of doing so. Great to see Luke Cridland up there in 5th. He certainly animated it toward the end. Nathan Guerra, Brendan Johnson, these are big names, big performers. Matt Robertson, Tay Charlton, the big standout in terms of attacks yesterday, and Ryan Thomas, who we just chatted to, rounding out that top 10. So it's been a pretty impressive 3 stages of racing. And I think one of the comments that really stuck with me from Trekkie was that the ability across the board is fairly level. So he didn't have an expectation that anybody would be dominant more or less than any of the other riders. And I think that the overall really shows that.
Let's now take a look at the results from the men's C-grade event, and we caught some of the action from that, and it was pretty tight near the top of the table. Shanaga was the winner by 50 seconds in the end in the overall classification. So today's stage was tight, but that's a pretty significant win, 50 seconds ahead of John T. Adam C. It was rounding out the top 3. And Kate, the Tour de Oz, as much as we're focused on the A grade race, it's the participation that really matters the most. Here's the D
Yeah, it
grade.
certainly
Keith
is. I'm not
Lovett
sure
managed
if you
to take the
noticed
win.
Harry Halfwheel down in there. Sorry, that was a funny
I
name.
didn't. Was there? I
But
missed that.
yes. Yeah.
That is fantastic. It's Keith Lovett managed to get the win to the tune of just 7 seconds in D grade. Anto Wath was in second place, then Tristan Cleave in third position. Malcolm Wade, it was who was fourth, and Gavin Bentley rounding out the top 5. So some tight racing in that one for the victory. The women's racing was certainly entertaining, particularly in the C grade race for the stage today, but it ended up being M. Andy taking the win ahead of Sophie Nightingale, and then Caitlin C. It was who was in third position. And the gaps in that one, again, Kate, pretty tight, just a 17-second gap between first place and second place.
Overall, a lot of depth of field. We had a lot of riders racing quite hard and knowing that the results really weren't there until the very end. The women's Cat D also some pretty tight time gaps around the middle, but a clear winner there, Sharpie taking the win ahead of Sherry Math and April Stanbury coming in third, rounding out that podium. But I've just been so heartened by how many women have lined up, especially in these community categories of the C and D. It really shows that the interest is there. And I think if we fast forward another year to the Tour of Oz 2022, we might see a lot of these names from C and D have actually moved up categories.
Yeah, and the winner of the D grade women's race there, Sharpie, if you go across to zwiftpower.com, I think you'll see that she'll be moving from D grade up to C grade. And maybe with that sort of result, Kate, she could be leaping across into B grade. So all the results will be available on Zwift Power. We've enjoyed bringing the coverage to you. The Tour de Oz, Kate, it's been a good one to get season 2021 started, but there's plenty more racing still to come on Zwift, and I know you'll be covering a lot of it.
Yeah, I sure will. So I love to see everybody in the community leagues, and it's been fantastic to see everybody turn up to the Tour of Oz. So I hope we can do it again next year, Matt. And in the meantime, we'll kind of turn our focus to some of the community leagues and for some of the riders that in real life racing.
And I'll try and participate in a few because I won't be racing at the front of any. Until next time,
yeah, give us
bye
something
for now.
to talk
right
about.
On.
Yeah.
I will. Bye, everyone.